He thought I was just another deckhand, replaceable, obedient, disposable. But when he tried to trap me on that yacht, miles from the coast and out of reach, he made one fatal mistake. He forgot that I wasn't just fighting for my job. I was fighting for my freedom. And by the time I finally stepped off his ship, I didn't just escape. I made sure his career went down with the tide. If you've ever been underestimated, silenced, or held hostage by someone who thought they had power over you, this story is for you. Subscribe to The Betrayal Diaries, where every act of control meets its quiet collapse and every wrong finds its wave of revenge. My name's Elena Rivera, and for most of my adult life, the sea has been my home. Not in the poetic sense, not the postcard sunsets and Instagram-perfect beaches, but the real sea, hard work, unpredictable weather, and the quiet pride that comes with surviving both. I've spent years as a stewardess and deckhand, working on yachts that drift from one luxury port to another, Nice, Monaco, Mallorca, and across to the Caribbean. To most people, it sounds glamorous. To those of us who live it, it's endurance disguised as elegance. Every season brings new crews, new owners, and new personalities to navigate. And last summer, I met the captain who would turn my dream job into a nightmare. His name was Captain Duval, French, mid-40s, always smelled faintly of cologne and arrogance. He had that effortless authority that made everyone else shrink when he walked in. The kind of man who never said please or thank you, only orders. And his partner, Lucia, was the yacht's so-called chef. Spanish, stunning, perpetually miserable. When I first joined the yacht Avellini, docked in the port of Antibes, I thought I'd hit the jackpot, a 20-meter motor yacht bound for the Caribbean, good pay, small crew, manageable guests. But the moment I stepped on board, I could feel the tension in the air. Lucia barely greeted me. She muttered something in Spanish and turned away. Duval, meanwhile, gave me a once-over like I was being inspected, then said, "We keep high standards here, Miss Rivera. You work hard, you'll do fine. You don't, you swim home." I laughed lightly, thinking it was a joke. He didn't. The first few days were uneventful, polishing chrome, scrubbing teak, learning the layout of the cabins. But it didn't take long to notice the cracks. The chef rarely cooked. She claimed the galley was too small, or she didn't have fresh ingredients, or she was resting. Meanwhile, Duval spent his hours pretending to be busy, while I did everything else, provisioning, cleaning, and organizing the guest cabins. Whenever I passed by the galley, Lucia would glare at me with this quiet hostility, muttering under her breath. I didn't understand every word, but I caught enough, young, naive, replaceable. I brushed it off. Yachting crews are small families, and sometimes family means friction. But soon it wasn't just friction, it was sabotage. One morning, Duval called me to the flybridge. "Miss Rivera," he said, squinting at the horizon, "Lucia tells me you've been difficult." Difficult? I repeated, surprised. "I've just been doing my duties." He smirked. "She says you complain too much about food. You don't like how we run things here." I wanted to tell him there was no we. Lucia did nothing. He did less. But instead, I said evenly, "I just think we should be prepared for a long passage. We're running low on supplies." He leaned closer, his breath sour with coffee and something stronger. "You're not here to think. You're here to obey." That was the first time I realized how this voyage was going to go. Days blurred together. No fresh food. No rest. Endless cleaning, polishing, scrubbing. Lucia spent her afternoons lying on the aft deck tanning while I ran around trying to keep the yacht functional. Duval strutted around in his captain's polo like a king without a kingdom, barking orders, then disappearing below deck for hours. And through it all, the silence of the sea surrounded us, beautiful but isolating. When you're out there, miles from land, there's nowhere to run. By the third week, I was exhausted, mentally and physically. I'd signed a contract until the 15th of October, but by the end of September, I knew I couldn't last that long. So I made a decision. I would quit. When I told Duval, he laughed. "You cannot just quit, Miss Rivera. You signed. You stay until the crossing." "I'll give notice," I said firmly. "A week." "That's fair." His smile didn't reach his eyes. You're free to leave when we dock. Until then, you work. But when we dock turned out to be a moving target. Because the next morning, instead of heading toward mainland Spain as planned, Duval announced we'd be sailing straight through to the Canary Islands, a long, grueling route with limited stops. I felt my stomach drop. Captain, that wasn't the agreement. I said I'd leave before the crossing. He shrugged. We'll discuss it later. But later never came. 3 days into that voyage, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't planning to let me disembark at all. Every time I tried to talk to him, he brushed me off. We'll see when we reach port. But there was no port. We were sailing nonstop. Lucia ignored me completely, except for the smirk she'd flash whenever I brought up leaving. And the longer we stayed at sea, the worse things got. Lucia refused to cook. We lived off crackers and canned tuna. I was running watches day and night, my body aching, my mind foggy. Every hour felt heavier, every horizon further away. By the time we approached the southern coast of Spain, I was desperate. I cornered Duval near the navigation station. Captain, I'm supposed to disembark before you reach Gibraltar, I said. I can't enter there legally without a visa. He didn't even look up from the chart. You'll be fine. Gibraltar is part of Spain. No, it's British territory, I insisted. I can't enter. I could get detained. He looked at me then, slow and deliberate, and smiled. Then you shouldn't have quit. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. But no, that smug tone, that flicker of amusement in his eyes, he was doing this on purpose. He wanted to make me panic. And it worked. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, every creak of the hull, every gust of wind, felt like a warning. I kept my passport hidden under my pillow, terrified he might take it. At sunrise, I tried calling the management agency, but it was Sunday. No answer. The Wi-Fi was weak, intermittent, and useless. So I did the only thing I could. I reached out to other crew members through private groups, people I'd met over the years, scattered across different boats. I told them what was happening, that the captain was refusing to let me disembark, that he was sailing toward a country I couldn't legally enter. The responses came quickly. Call the Coast Guard. You're being held against your will. Get proof. Record everything. And that's when the idea hit me. If I couldn't escape yet, I could at least make sure there was evidence when I did. That night, as the Avellini cut through dark waters toward the strait, I set my phone to record. I hid it on the flybridge, angled toward the helm. And I waited. Because I knew Duval. I knew his temper, his pride, his need for control. All I had to do was give him a reason to show it. The night before everything came crashing down, the sea was quiet, too quiet. The wind had died hours ago, and the yacht drifted through dark waters under a sky heavy with stars. Normally, I found peace in moments like that. The ocean has a rhythm, a pulse that usually soothes me. But that night, every sound set me on edge, the low hum of the generator, the shuffle of boots on deck, the hollow clang of loose rigging. I was standing my night watch on the flybridge, eyes fixed on the horizon, when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate, familiar. Captain Duval. I knew this would happen. I'd been expecting it ever since I called the yacht's owner earlier that day. The call had been my last resort. The management agency hadn't replied, the Wi-Fi was fading in and out, and I was terrified that if I didn't act, he'd actually take me into Gibraltar, where I'd face immigration issues that could ruin my entire career. So I took a risk. I contacted Mr. Laurent, the yacht's owner. To my surprise, he answered. His voice was calm but sharp, the kind of tone that told me he understood immediately that something was wrong. Elena, tell me everything, he said. I explained the situation, the refusal to let me off the yacht, the aggressive behavior, the exhaustion. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, "You will disembark in southern Spain tomorrow. I'll handle the captain." It was the first time I'd felt safe in days. But safety, I'd soon learn, is fragile, especially when the person you're afraid of realizes you've gone above his head. So when Duval climbed the flybridge steps that night, I slipped my phone deeper into my jacket pocket, camera recording, microphone on. He didn't waste time. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he snapped, his voice cutting through the still air. I don't know what you mean, Captain. Don't play innocent, he hissed. You called Laurent. You went behind my back. He's the owner, I said evenly. I had no other choice. You're unprofessional, he said, stepping closer. You're lucky I don't throw you overboard for this stunt. I forced myself to stay calm. You threatened to drop me in Gibraltar knowing I can't legally go there. I had to protect myself. His expression darkened. Protect yourself? He repeated, his accent thickening with anger. You think you can make trouble for me? For us? He gestured toward the cabins below deck, where Lucia was sleeping or pretending to. Then he lunged forward. It happened fast, too fast. He tried to grab my phone. I stepped back instinctively, heart pounding, hands shaking. Give it to me, he shouted. Stop. The yacht rocked slightly under our weight, the sea whispering against the hull. Don't you dare record me, he spat, reaching again. You'll regret this. His fingers brushed my sleeve, and in that second, his face twisted, teeth clenched, hand raised as if he might strike me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. But then, as if realizing what he was about to do, he stopped. For a moment, we just stood there. The only sounds were our breathing and the slow churn of the sea. Then he lowered his hand, straightened his jacket, and said coldly, You'll be gone tomorrow. Pray, I still sign your pay slip. He turned and disappeared down the steps. My knees gave out the second he was gone. I sat there on the deck, shaking, the phone still recording, the stars spinning overhead. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just leave quietly. He had threatened me, humiliated me, and tried to trap me at sea. Now I had the proof, his rage, his words, his tone, all captured in that single recording. But my revenge wouldn't stop there. Morning came gray and windless. The sea was a sheet of dull silver. Lucia avoided my eyes at breakfast, though I could feel her watching me. Duval said nothing. He just stood at the helm, his jaw set tight, pretending to focus on the chart plotter. I knew what had happened. Laurent must have called him after my report. The tension on board was electric. We were approaching the coast of Spain by mid-morning. The faint line of land shimmered in the distance, the promise of safety just hours away. But those hours crawled by like days. Every time Duval barked an order, I felt the heat rise in my chest. Every step, every task, coiling tension, waiting for release. Finally, as we neared the port of Fuengirola, he called out, Prepare for docking. The words sounded like freedom. As soon as the lines were tied and the engines cut, I went below deck to grab my things. I had already hidden my passport, my phone, and the small envelope containing my contract. When I came back up, he was waiting by the gangway. He didn't look at me when he spoke. You're off. Thank you, I said quietly. Don't thank me, he muttered. You're finished in yachting. You'll never work again after this. I paused, turning to face him. Maybe not on your kind of yacht. His eyes flickered, just for a second, the first hint of uncertainty I'd ever seen in him. Then I stepped off the yacht, feeling the solid ground beneath my feet for the first time in weeks. And I promised myself one thing. I wouldn't let what happened disappear into silence. That night, after checking into a small guest house near the port, I opened my laptop. The Wi-Fi was strong. My hands trembled slightly as I uploaded the recording to a secure drive and then sent copies to Laurent, to the management agency, and to the Maritime Labor Office. I wrote detailed notes, dates, times, every instance of misconduct. Then I wrote one final email to a contact of mine, a chief stewardess I'd met years ago, who ran a private Facebook group for crew members. Subject line, Warning, Captain Duval, M/Y Avellini. I told her everything. The threats. The unsafe working conditions. The manipulation. And I asked her to share it discreetly, widely, relentlessly. By midnight, the post was live. And by morning, the whispers had begun. In the world of yachting, news travels faster than the tide. Within 24 hours, the story had reached the crew networks in Palma, Antibes, and St. Tropez. People started messaging me, not strangers, but fellow crew who'd worked with Duval before. They all said the same thing. He did the same to me. I left after 2 weeks. You were lucky to get out. Each message felt like a validation, like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. And the more I read, The more certain I became, I wasn't just getting revenge for myself. I was warning everyone else before it was too late. A week later, I got an email from Laurent. He apologized for what I went through. Said he'd confronted Duval directly, and that Duval denied everything. But then Laurent added something that made me smile. It's strange. We've been trying to hire a new crew member for weeks, but no one wants to join Avellini. Apparently, the industry has heard things. He didn't know the half of it. Because by then, Duval's name had become a red flag across every major yachting group in the Mediterranean. Crews stopped replying to his listings. Applicants canceled interviews. His reputation was sinking faster than a cracked hull. And all I had to do was tell the truth. Still, part of me wanted closure, the personal kind. So I watched from a distance as the Avellini lingered in port week after week, unable to find a new stewardess or deckhand. Every time a listing went up, it vanished days later. Every time he posted in a crew group, someone commented, "Be careful with this captain." He must have known it was me, but he couldn't prove it. And that, perhaps, was the best part. The morning after I left the Avellini, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains of my tiny room in Fuengirola. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I had to listen for footsteps outside my door. No shouting. No slamming. No stench of diesel or stress in the air. Just quiet. I sat up slowly, legs heavy, my body finally feeling the exhaustion that had been building for days. And then, as the events of the past week came rushing back, a single thought replaced the fatigue. He thought he could get away with it. That thought lit something inside me. Something cold and clear. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. When you work in yachting, you learn that the industry runs on two things: reputation and trust. There's no union strong enough to protect you, no boss watching over every captain. Word of mouth is your protection and your weapon. So I decided that if Duval wanted to play dirty, I would play precise. My first step was simple: gather allies. I reached out to Clara, a chief stewardess I'd met years earlier on a charter in the south of France. She was well-connected, the kind of person who always knew which captains to avoid. When I told her what happened, she was furious. "Elena, you could have been deported," she said. "That's beyond unprofessional. That's dangerous." "I know," I said quietly. "I just don't want it to happen to someone else." "You won't have to worry," she replied. "Leave it to me." Within hours, she'd shared my message privately, carefully, with her network. By the end of the day, I had messages from deckhands in Palma, chefs in Antibes, and engineers in Malta, all confirming they'd seen Duval's job postings and decided not to apply. "He's toxic," one wrote. "We've all heard the stories now." That's when I realized my revenge was no longer just mine. It was collective. But I wasn't finished. I wanted something official, something that would stick to his record. So I started researching. The Avellini was registered under the Cayman Islands flag, which meant the Cayman Maritime Authority oversaw all crew complaints. Their process wasn't easy, and I knew the management company would try to minimize everything. But I had evidence, dates, emails, and most importantly, the recording. Even if the audio wasn't legally valid, it painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. So I spent 3 days writing a detailed report, every shift, every argument, every moment of fear. I attached screenshots, copies of my contract, and the audio file. And when I hit send, I felt lighter. Like I'd taken back something that had been stolen. Weeks passed. I found temporary work on a smaller sailboat near Marbella, just enough to keep me afloat financially while I waited for the investigation. Every morning, I checked my inbox. Nothing. But I didn't feel helpless anymore. Because the whispers about Duval were growing louder. Crew agents stopped working with him. His name was quietly removed from listings. Someone posted a thread in a major Facebook group titled "Avoid M/Y Avellini, Toxic Work Environment." It didn't mention me by name. But I didn't need credit. All I wanted was for people to see him the way I now did, as a man whose authority was built on intimidation, not skill. And bit by bit, that illusion began to crack. One afternoon, I got a message from an unfamiliar number. "Hi Elena, this is Marie from Ocean Line Recruitment. We recently received an application from Captain Duval. Before proceeding, We'd like to verify a few things you might know about his past crew relations. I nearly laughed out loud. Apparently, he was looking for a new position, but recruiters were now checking with me. I typed carefully, explaining that I had reported him to his management and flag authority, attaching the relevant case number. No exaggerations, no emotion, just the truth. A few hours later, she wrote back. Thank you. That's all we needed. He's been removed from our candidate list. That message, that single line, was the most satisfying thing I'd read in months. Still, there was one thing I hadn't done yet. When I left the yacht, Duval had shouted after me that I'd never work again. At the time, I'd swallowed the words, too exhausted to argue. But now I wanted to prove him wrong. So I started applying for new positions carefully, strategically. I polished my resume, updated my references, and included a few well-placed recommendations from reputable captains I'd worked with before. Within a week, I had 3 offers. One of them was from a 45-meter yacht based in Monaco, the Celestine, known for being one of the best-run vessels in the Mediterranean fleet. When the captain, James Holloway, interviewed me, he asked casually, "Out of curiosity, why did you leave your last yacht so suddenly?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. Because I refused to compromise my safety for someone else's ego. He nodded slowly, as if that told him everything he needed to know. Good, he said. We don't hire people who stay quiet when something's wrong. And, just like that, I was hired. Working on the Celestine was like stepping into another world. Professional crew. Respectful leadership. Real teamwork. It reminded me why I fell in love with yachting in the first place. And, from that deck, looking out at the blue expanse of the Mediterranean, I could finally see Avellini for what it really was, not the end of my story, but the start of something far stronger. But poetic justice has a way of circling back when you least expect it. Because a few months later, while docked in Nice, I ran into someone I never thought I'd see again. Lucia. I spotted her at the Marina Cafe, same dark hair, same perpetual skull. But this time, she looked smaller somehow. Tired. Worn out. She didn't see me at first. She was speaking to another crew member, and I overheard bits of their conversation. He still hasn't found a full-time job, she was saying. No one will hire him. They say he's blacklisted or something. Her companion laughed softly. Maybe karma finally caught up. When she noticed me standing there, her eyes widened. Elena, she said quietly. Lucia. An awkward pause hung between us. I heard about what happened, she finally muttered. With the Coast Guards, the reports, all that. He's furious. Says someone sabotaged him. Someone? I asked mildly. She hesitated, then sighed. He knows it was you. But I don't blame you. I left him. I blinked. You did. She nodded. Couldn't take it anymore. He's angry all the time. Drinks too much. Keeps saying the whole industry turned on him overnight. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just said softly, the sea has a long memory. And I walked away. That night, I sat on deck watching the reflection of the city lights dance on the water. For the first time, the ocean felt peaceful again. Because revenge wasn't always about destroying someone. Sometimes, it was about reclaiming your power, piece by piece, until you could stand tall again, even knowing the person who tried to break you had sunk on their own. And that was exactly what Duval had done. He'd built his career on arrogance, on fear, on control. And now, stripped of those things, he was just another washed-up captain no one wanted to sail with. The following weeks passed in an almost cinematic calm. Every sunrise over the Côte d'Azur reminded me that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The Celestine was a sanctuary, polished decks, fair leadership, laughter over shared meals. After the nightmare I'd survived, that peace felt like wealth. But beneath that tranquility, something was still brewing. Because karma, as it often does, was taking its time, working quietly, efficiently, unseen beneath the surface. And then it surfaced. It was late February when I got an unexpected email from the Cayman Islands Maritime Authority. Ms. Morales, we've reviewed your report and supporting materials regarding Captain Duval of the M/Y Avellini. Based on our findings, disciplinary action is being taken. The vessel's management has been instructed to remove Captain Duval from his position pending formal review. Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. I read it 3 times. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out the hum of the yacht's engines. He was being removed. A single paragraph, just a few lines, but it was the culmination of every sleepless night, every knot of fear I'd carried while trapped at sea with him. I'd won. That night, I didn't celebrate with champagne or confetti. I just sat on deck with a mug of tea, listening to the waves slap softly against the hull. It wasn't triumph that filled me, it was peace. Because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice finally catching up. Still, poetic justice has its own sense of timing. A week later, I got a message from Clara. "You won't believe this," she wrote. "He's been blacklisted by 3 agencies now. Apparently, he's threatening legal action against everyone. It's pathetic." I couldn't help it, I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from deep down, the kind that only arrives when the universe finally puts things right. Months rolled by. The yachting season picked up, and I was busier than ever, charters, crossings, ports I'd only dreamed of before. But the whispers about Avellini followed me like a ripple across the sea. Everyone knew what had happened now. At marinas, I'd overhear fragments. That captain who tried to deport his stewardess, yeah, him, lost his job. The owner was furious. He's been trying to freelance, but nobody wants him on board. Each time I heard it, I didn't feel guilty, just calm. He'd built his reputation on intimidation. Now, that same reputation was what destroyed him. By midsummer, I heard he was working on a small private boat somewhere in Marseille. No crew. No salary worth mentioning. Just him, cleaning his own decks. That image stayed with me. The mighty captain reduced to the man who once screamed at me for daring to speak to the yacht's owner. Now, all he had left was himself. And that, I realized, was the perfect ending. But I did one last thing. It wasn't revenge. It was closure. I wrote an anonymous post in one of the largest yachting groups, not naming names, but telling my story in full. I described how manipulation hides behind authority, how isolation and fear can twist even the strongest sailor, and how community, our shared voice, can protect each other from predators who wear uniforms instead of masks. The post went viral in hours. Hundreds of messages poured in, deckhands, chefs, engineers, even captains, all thanking me for speaking up. Many had their own Duval stories, and for the first time, they felt less alone. One message stood out. "I was about to take a job on that same yacht. Your story saved me. Thank you." That one made me cry. Because in that moment, I knew that my suffering hadn't been wasted. It had turned into someone else's warning, someone else's safety net. Months later, I crossed paths with the yacht's owner again, briefly, during a charter in Monaco. He recognized me immediately. "Elena," he said warmly. "You were right. I should have listened sooner." He embarrassed my company, my vessel. "You did the right thing." Hearing that from the man who'd once trusted Duval completely was its own kind of justice. He offered me a position back on Avellini, now under a new captain, fully restaffed and rehabilitated. I thanked him but declined. "Some stories," I told him, "are better left at sea." That night, under a violet sky, I wrote my final diary entry about it all. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about balance. Sometimes, justice looks like silence, like watching the tide reclaim the wreckage it once carried. And when that happens, all you can do is smile, breathe, and keep sailing forward. I closed my notebook, leaned on the railing, and watched the horizon dissolve into the deep blue. In the distance, I saw another yacht's silhouette moving slowly, lights flickering in the dusk. For a brief moment, I wondered if Duval was out there somewhere, watching the same horizon. Maybe he'd finally realized that fear doesn't make you powerful. Respect does. Either way, I had my freedom back. And nothing, no storm, no man, no memory, could take that away again. So, what do we learn from this? That revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical. Sometimes it's knowing that you walked away with your dignity intact, and they were left with nothing but their reflection in the wreckage they made. If you believe karma always finds its way home, hit that like button and subscribe to the Betrayal Diaries. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded. No one sails through life unchecked. The tide always turns.